It's been a minute. I want to answer this question from Mr. Wizard first because I think it leads me in nicely to what I've been sort of working on over the course of the week with regard to contextualizing the Poker Detox Night Vision pack. So the question is how many bet sizings have I played with? Am I working with stuff like huge trees? Is my conclusion that the 33% flop sizing, like 33, 66, 66, is best? I think I have to go back to creating the PO Unlocked pack to sort of build some context to understand this best. In early April, my purpose for making that pack was kind of twofold. I knew that there were spots that people needed to be exploiting in terms of just high frequency hotspots, mainly with regard to stabbing more often than people were stabbing. So a lot of that was the basis of the pack is playing better in position, floating flops more, auto stabbing turns, auto stabbing flops when check to. Um, and so that naturally was required to be blended with what the community's language was, which was theory and still is, but I think we're doing a better job of moving away from it. So the PO Unlocked pack became a blend of simplified, well-balanced strategies while also using the intuitive exploitative hotspots that I knew of at the time that weren't necessarily backed up with nearly as much mass data analysis as we have now, but we're still empirically driven through a lot of the manual grid work and some subset aggregation reports that we were able to run in PO Solver at the time. So now moving toward the question, is the 33%, the 33, 66, 66 bet sizing scheme the best? Well, it was the most practical at the time when we were using PO Solver in terms of using well-balanced strategies that reduce strategic options. So in that way, it was the best. What I thought was sort of lucky about it and sort of like the magical hack was that it turned out to be funneling the villains into a line that they were very unprepared for. So it ended up being, I think, the sizing that exploits the pool the most. So now you're playing on two different levels of awesomeness. You have a highly simplified strategy that also is highly exploitative in the sense that the pool doesn't know how to deal with it. So in that sense, I would say, yeah, I think it is the best, but it's a merge of practicality benefits and also exploitative benefits. So one of the things we're looking at when making the night vision pack in terms of making it most versatile for guys is that we're very aware that one of the drawbacks of the PO Unlocked pack were that there were certain guys who weren't ready to just start using the 1/3 system. So we don't want to be forcing that on anyone. We want to make this pack able to fit for whatever sizing scheme or whatever overall strategy you're currently running. And I am confident that you'll find a lot of hotspots no matter what bet sizing schemes that you're using. Um, I think that the solution to the question is to move away from the idea that many bet sizings over like huge game trees will improve your win rate, which I think is like the most relevant thing. I also don't think it gives you very much theoretical EV at all. From the stuff that I've run, just an example, like if you use an overbet turn sizing with another strategic option of a smaller sizing, you get a pretty negligible amount of win rate, even on boards where it uses the overbet quite a bit. So after seeing stuff like that and thinking, well, this doesn't even translate that well because who's implementing well-balanced overbet strategies, it lends itself to sort of climbing the stairway to higher relevancy and saying, well, we need to just be picking the most proper exploitative sizings possible that are incentivized by the overall pool. So that's sort of the direction we're moving in right now is like, how can we take what we started with earlier in the year, which was simplified, well-balanced strategies that also exploited and sort of build on it in a way that justifies higher win rates for what the environments are basically incentivizing. A lot of that is going to be about pattern recognition, grouping certain hotspots, and kind of just highlighting the decision points or key lines of the strategies that you really need to be pouring in on. I don't think that you'll have a problem sticking with whatever bet sizing scheme that you're using. I think what'll be most beneficial to you is if you move into super exploitative territory and stop trying to balance those bet sizings. So you can use overbet river bet sizings, but the problem is you're going to have trouble identifying as many mass database points, data points, because that's a sizing that's used less often. It's a sizing that people face less often. So that might be my one condition, is that don't use sizing schemes that you're going to have trouble filtering for environmental responses to, because that's going to skew your data analysis and it's not going to help your overall blueprint. So you want to use something orthodox enough that you're going to have enough data points to go with. Final answer. All right, we got our guys' hands, so we can start. Ricky T. Ricky, say hi in the chat so everybody can identify you. Let me check my headset, D-Dog. Looks okay from here. I just got this new wireless piece. What's up, Johnny C? I'll get to that in a second. How is the sound for everyone? There's Ricky. Pretty blatant. Take a look at what this graph looks like. Ricky, what site are we on? Looks like we're playing 20. What stakes is this? I think I'm going to close Skype because my computer seems to be dragging. Alright, cool. Sound is good. Oh, okay. It's Star Zoom. 10-cent, 25-cent Star Zoom. Okay, cool. Would anybody like to pick a filter? I'm going to leave it up to the chat. First guy to pick a filter wins. I'll answer Johnny C's question in the meantime. How would you adjust your strategy button versus big blind versus a player who has 22% check raise in single raise pots and his fold to C bet is 33% overall? That's a pretty good player in terms of facing off versus the 1/3 strategy, and also probably just check raising exploitatively. I don't see many players like this. That's because there's very few guys that are actually playing versus the environment correctly. I don't feel comfortable c-betting 33% pot size bet with 100% frequency. Yeah, he's probably playing quite well versus you. That being said, the PO unlocked packs were basically there to show you that even if someone plays perfectly versus that, you still only sacrifice 2% of the pot or so. So then the question becomes how much of a sacrifice of the pot is okay or acceptable, and that becomes hard to determine because it depends how much you're leaking in the check back line. So if you're going to understand this in terms of how it pertains to line versus line, you have to see how often you're making mistakes when you play the check back line. I don't know how much you are, but I know for sure that the average player in most environments, even up to high stakes, is massively overfolding versus turn stab. I'm not saying that people are probing turns often enough after you check back, but when you see something like the environment overfolding 15% versus turn probe, you can see how you're really susceptible to guys who know about that hotspot leak. Now they actually don't over probe the turn, so you're not getting ripped apart by it. But it's an issue of controlling your range. I think that if you have good intuitive skills on the fly for how to exploit on turn and river runouts, you're better off playing a check back range versus a player like that. If you're not so savvy at that, I would just still go with the 1/3 and deal with it. Keep in mind, guys, you have exploits post flop. Like that guy check raises 22%, but if his check raising range isn't well balanced, you can float the shit out of that and punish him on future streets. Even if it is balanced, he's playing an equity pushing range that probably has a lot of merged hands in it that probably doesn't know how to defend itself properly over future streets because he's going to have to check very often. So I think you can play an exploitative war with him where if you want to do it this way, you can float a lot of flops and then pressure a lot of his turn checks and put him in a really headache type um, battle with you. Overall, though, that would be the player that falls into the category of the guy that I'm going to try to just play a little more sound against, and then focus on the rest, the other 80% of the pool that I'm stomping with my strategy. George asked, what's the most common mistakes regs are committing in small pots that's crucial to win rate? They're not stabbing enough and they're not check raising enough. And I almost would say this is the filter that we should do. But based on what I just said, to answer Johnny C's question, if somebody was like, Nick, let's do a stab filter, the hotspots are so blatant that my advice would just be stab all. Like I had a lesson last night with someone where I said he was stabbing something like 42%, like probing out of position 42% after the button checked back in that line. And I said, you would be better off with 100% stab frequency here, closing your eyes and doing it on every board than what you're currently doing based on what the environment is incentivizing. Now, that's a hard thing to hear because it almost it almost comes down to the fact that people don't want it to be that simple, I think. Plus there's a cognitive dissonance that seems to think that, well, that's so reckless, I would get played back at, and it goes into the paranoid territory of thinking that the environment's going to adjust. The other portion of it is just trying things out like this and then maybe running bad for a little while. Like that's what happened with this student, is that like every time he's gone for an aggressive strategy adjustment, he's run bad during that period, and it's sort of like beat him down, hit his cognitive his confirmation bias pretty much got flared up and was like, well, this can't be right because I'm running into a wall here. So I think it's a kind of him intensifying that complex and also probably him running bad combined, which really sucks because that'll fuck with your mental quite a bit. And that's why I think you need very large samples to show you this stuff. Because this, I think, is one of the biggest things that guys struggle with, is especially if you come from a passive orientation, you will struggle to consistently implement aggressive stab strategies like this because it requires a lot of you in terms of attention, in terms of emotional resilience. Like, yeah, a lot of times it won't work, but if it's trimming the environment for a few percent extra fold equity each time, realize how that adds up a lot, especially in high frequency spots. So it's one of the things that when I get a new aggressive student, I'm like, okay, cool, this is a little bit easier because I know that guy's going to integrate this type of blueprint a little bit faster because it just comes more naturally to him to be able to just spontaneously, I don't want to say force aggression because I don't think it's force in terms of compensational, but he has a little bit more momentum behind just being able to easily put the heat on. Whereas it's more of the passive guy who will understand the lesson behind it and then go into a regression where he forgets to implement it consistently or gets an idea in his head that it's not working. Um, so yeah, it's that type of stuff. Filter 3-bet out of position. Cool, let's do it. Sorry if anybody said something before that, but that's the one I saw first. Sorry, Andrew. You're too late. Maybe we can do that one too after. If you guys haven't noticed, I'm getting a little stronger. Been hitting the gym hard as fuck. Bench press, killing it. Deadlifts, crushing. Johnny asked, are there some boards where people just don't fold versus turn probe so often? Not really. They overfold on every single one that we filtered for texturally over databases of 20 to 30 million hands, which I think are substantial enough for those reads. This was at stars 200 NL, merged with 100 NL. So that's why I say you can literally close your eyes and fire, because when the hotspot's that big, it doesn't make sense to do anything else. Okay, let's go. Don't get me wrong, there's subtleties to probing, especially which rivers you should follow up on. But the river's a universal hotspot too, just not as much. Um, and there will be some, like I've had students do texture interactions from turn to river to study which ones are really bad for barreling, and there's only a couple. I'll give you a hint, like the ace on the river is pretty bad for the most part. That's one that stands out. What am I doing wrong with this filter? That I'm only getting 3 hands. This year, did 3-bet is true, and 3-better is in position is false. Oh, I'm on, no, I'm not on marked hands. Did 3-bet. Now we've got a lot more. Maybe I'll just do this one. Or maybe there's another out of position filter I can use. Actually, I know what I'll do. I'm just going to put where the big blind. Or small blind. Okay, cool. Hi, Spewy Griffin. Theme of the stream is volunteer hand history lesson. We're doing out of position 3-bet filter. I'll answer this last question by Wizard as a follow-up, and then we'll head right into it. I guess let's just do all. We'll do a mix today of. I'm just gonna do it like this. It's just a total mix. Can you maybe give a little more overview on the 33, 66, 66 bet sizing scheme strategy? Did you solve trees for the bet sizes and try to learn the results in game? Or did you node lock 100% c-bet flop and then turn and river play? We did both. PO Unlocked was geared around showing what happens if you use a 33% c-bet frequency at optimal, which is you're allowed to c-bet more. Then we went into the simplification of it and said, what happens if we c-bet 100%, showed that there's not a drastic amount of EV lost, even if out of position takes the perfect counter strategy, which would be to check raise really aggressively and fold very rarely. Then we sort of extrapolated on that with relevant data points that most players were not playing anywhere near what the maximally exploitative strategy was as out of position. In fact, they were over folding. So you can do it in 2 parts. You can use their optimal flop defense. You can do 3 parts actually. You can use their optimal response versus 1/3. You can use their environmental response, which is to overfold, or you can use their maximally exploitative response, which is to do something like fold very rarely and raise a ton. In terms of modeling your environment, what you probably want to use is what the pool averages are. And then you can lock that head to the turn. And what you find a lot of on the turn is that, well, obviously PO is playing very mixed strategies from in position. And the way that I sort of moved around that paradox was to see where the river imbalances were. So by no means can you eliminate turn mixed strategies, but by moving to the river and finding out that there's substantial river hotspots for firing 3 barrels, what we decided was that it made a lot of sense to move more of our equity-driven turn bluffs into pure strategies to bet the turn so they could line up for taking advantage of the river line. So this is a type of problem-solving skills that I think are so useful for being a strategy developer in a way, which I guess is what I would coin myself as, like more than anything. It's like, here's the paradox. We can't implement something this complex. How do we use the data points of the environment to simplify something and also move toward higher accuracy simultaneously? So you're getting around the problem by working toward a solution in a different direction than the problem seems to appear. Most people, I think, are trying to engage the problem head on, and that's why you see the community wrapped up in theory, trying to solve it with more theory, but it's a dead end because it's already too complex. So simplification is, I think, the answer to moving to higher levels of problem solving skills, except in order to simplify, there's actually a lot of mass database analysis that has to be done before you can argue this is the direction because this is what's incentivized. So that's basically what the evolution of the whole poker detox project has been, is like, how do we speak the language of the community to bridge them to something that's actually more beneficial and simplified. And I think the way you do that is providing massive amounts of data, because that's the language that the theory group speaks. Everybody would love to win more, but before they do, they need to see the scientific black and white proof that this is what's going on. And it's the reason I think that the night vision pack is going to hit so hard, is because I really feel like it's the pack that's the real bridge to get everybody out of the theory mode, because it's speaking to them from their own level. It's like, hey, I know you guys are all numbers guys and love the idea of not simplified math, but theoretical math. Here's the scientific data saying what the environments are actually doing. We've proven we have more vision than we previously did when we were wrapped up in the theory paradigm. Let's move forth now from here because it's just more relevant. There's a video I put out. It'll be on Run It Once in a week or two. But the way I ended it was something like that, where I said, I want you guys to see that we're not contradicting theory here. Everything that we've been learning in terms of simplified strategies and equilibriums and how to sort of move around them are still very relevant. It's just that we're opening up into a wider field now where we have more vision, and this is the natural evolution of it. All right, cool. So I'll hide the results again from you guys. I think it's already doing that. You're welcome. By the way, guys, we're affiliated with Hand to Note now. I'm gonna get you a promo code if you guys want to start signing up. Also, if you buy night vision, I'll send it out with the pack, but you'll get like some sort of discount on your first purchase or whatever, subscription. So don't sign up for Hand to Know yet until you tell us. Brian, if you're listening, paste that promo code in the chat for everybody. I think this hand's fine. Nothing to say. I think he's missing value on that river. I put our position could be big blind and small blind, so I think we're going to get 3-bet from when we are either big blind or small blind, which is what I want. We'll see though if it works out. What was this line? 4-bet? 5-bet? So we have a really small 5-bet that gets flatted. Am I seeing things? No. Okay. We check flop. I think that's okay, especially when we're giving him every chance in the world to basically make a mistake when we're nutted. You guys know I'm a fan of that. Just use the promo code, Bri. Don't post it as a link. I think this hand's played fine and well. I would play it the same, I think. Here's something I'm never doing. This looks like a spewy Griffin type play. There's just no, there's never a reason to be doing this with this hand. It's almost as simple as that. I could go into why, but I mean, it's pretty clear the environment's not bluffing enough in his shoes. We don't have any type of real equity that we're driving with our hand, and it's just spew. Especially if he's going to be flatting with shit like this. Um, just mop the floor with them with a 5-bet value range. You don't need to be doing stuff like this. Or if you are going to play something like this, use like ace king or ace queen, not polarized bluffs. Hand to note is the shit, by the way. It's completely revolutionized what we're able to do with the night vision pack. Like 2 weeks ago, I posted what we were thinking about releasing for the pack, and since then, because of the evolution of us working more with hand to note, we're basically transforming the entire pack. So I'm fucking super psyched about it. I honestly think it's going to blow the industry wide open because I don't think anybody's going to be able to refute how much better it actually is. I don't know if I've said this yet, but like I think it's literally going to be what the heads up display was in like 2008 when it came out. Like it's going to become the standard for anybody who actually takes their shit seriously. That's the promo code in the chat, guys. Arizona was taken, just posted it. Tell your friends. This is a lot of, I keep thinking there's a lot of 3-betting, 4-betting going on. I forget we have this filter on. All right, so here's a spot where I won't call 4-bet. The environments overall are not 4-betting enough, and in middle position versus small blind formation, especially when we're only getting 1.87 to 1 back, I'm just going to fold. I know that we're deep, so that I guess makes it a little bit better, but I'm still not trying to go up against a range that's just squashing me. Like this might literally be a 2% range. It won't get banned, Witchful. If it does, I'll go ape shit and I'll get it unbanned. Hand to note HUD looks sick too, Johnny. Just had a meeting with the guys today, or I posted something in our group chat where I said we're looking to expand in that direction, making customized HUDs using hand to note. A problem with this type of hand is now you're getting stuck in a theory-oriented mindset, check calling 2 streets in a spot where he's either super equity driven or not even bluffing enough in the first place. So what the mind will do here is like, it'll say, well, there's no way I can fold top pair this part of my range, but it forgets that it was already squashed pre-flop to begin with. So like, yeah, the flop check call is fine, but now heading to the turn, it's like, is he really still capable of bluffing here? And if he does have bluffs, how equity driven are they? I don't think that he's bluffing nearly often enough with poorly randomized hands to justify check calling turn. And it's also going to lead you into a spot in the river where you're sort of in mixed strategy mode. Like, oh, I've got a top pair that I should call sometimes and not others, but on the river it's a really fucking clear fold. So this will be a really big mistake if you call this river. And the turn was even a mistake before that. I'm glad you folded. It's a good example of a hand you should never be in the first place because there's just no... I don't want people to take this in a skewed way when I say there's no good outcome, but the fact that you're already squashed versus a turn barrel when you flop top pair shows you that you're likely not messing with it. You're messing with a pre-flop range that you shouldn't be fucking with in the first place in terms of messing with his pre-flop range. Remember in 2008 where these live players were talking like, these online guys, they play the whole game just looking at the numbers. And then I was like sitting at the table like it's not really how it works because you can't just use only numbers, even if you have every single stat on a HUD, because at that point there was no benchmark for what the equilibrium actually was. So now move forward to 2017 with hand to note, and it actually is that now. Like you can literally play the entire game just on hotspot decision points in certain lines because we're going maximally exploitative, focusing in spots where guys have like 7% or more deviations from what the PO suggested frequencies are. So that's what I think is so badass and ridiculous about it is that um, it's never been more simple, yet it's never required more of you, more from you, because now you're actually going to be required to change. I wrote that down on my phone today. I'm going to write up a little blog about it. Um, it's like two at once. It's so simple now if you put in the work, but it's so hard to make that transition because you're literally jumping ship from what the societal norm is in the industry. Like I would probably just fold to this 4-bet too. I'm not concerned at all with playing a well-balanced defense versus 4-bet, especially when I'm only getting 2.3 to 1. So I think this is a leak that's coming over from whatever videos you've watched that are recommending certain 4-bet ranges. The problem I see with a lot of small stakes guys is that they're not capable of bridging the gap between what's correct in a model, pre-flop especially, and then what they should be doing in theory. And the reason for that is just that most guys haven't done the mass database analysis work to see how rarely the environment is 4-bet bluffing. It's a very biased filter because now we're seeing all these 4-bets and they're like, well, they're actually 4-betting a lot, but no. I don't know what we'll do with the custom HUD yet. I know that if I do it, it'll be very practical, and that's the only reason I'd be interested in doing it is because I think a lot of guys are wasting their time with really advanced HUDs with tons of stats. I think what my skill is finding, the 80% that's really worth. What is it, like the 80/20 thing? Like taking the real nut out of whatever their large HUD is using. So 80% of the win rate might be found in 20% of the stats that you're using, I guess is what I mean. And that's what I love to do is simplify while trying to retain as much accuracy as possible. What range do I flat this 4-bet with? At this limit, I think I would use King Queen suited plus for this sizing too. Maybe like King Queen suited plus would be the bare bottom of my flatting range, and probably like I wouldn't even jam pocket tens. I think I might just flat it. I would probably start jamming pocket jacks, but I wouldn't even feel great about it. Like that's how shitty I think this spot is in terms of how tight their ranges are on average. What player type has the biggest impact on population blueprint strategy? The regs. Most of the aliases that you build should be predicated on reg analysis because they're making up the bulk of the hands. That being said, it's also very helpful to understand how to play exploitatively versus fish. So I really think that you should be building two databases. How you play in a vacuum will mainly be dictated by the regs because they make up the vast majority of the hands played in the pool. But it is helpful to know if you have that fish identified, what his player profile's main leaks are. And in a lot of spots they're the same, but in some spots they're different. How tight do I think they are in this spot? I think they might have something like, I want to say their range is like something like 2 to 3%. It's tight enough that I would never 5-bet bluff it. Let's put it that way. So this is the same thing as the King Jack suited hand, more or less, in terms of how I would categorize it. This I would just ship because it's just strong enough. Like I said, I would feel weird about jacks. Queens, I'm like definitely getting it in though, because now you're just dominating parts of his 4-bet call off range. Like jacks and tens, that's a lot of domination to have with queens. Prove me wrong. This is stars 25 NL, correct? Maybe we're just getting some of the fishies in this filter. I think you can get a V-bet in here, no? So he's raising flop, check, check turn. I think we have to... I understand you're afraid of the 8, and that might be why you're checking. But I see these guys merge raise a ton and then check back, so I think I might still put in a bet here. I don't make him from any 8x from the cutoff. I guess that's why I'm not so scared of this card, and I feel like even a bet of like $4 to $6 would just be really lucrative versus someone who's merge raising the flop, which I think is the next most likely thing if he wasn't bluff raising. That's a really easy call. Nice, so you maximized. What Padis just said is a pretty funny point that sort of proves the point. Yeah, if we bet the river, we would bet fold for sure in this spot. This is almost the exact same hand where I think we could put the bet in and play a bet fold. I just expect to see a lot of like middling pocket pair, maybe even tens and jacks. I don't want to lose value against that. So I guess that's kind of the what I expected to see more of last hand. Checking here I think is more appropriate because I don't expect his range to be as merged. I don't expect a certain confidence interval of his raising range to be as merged. So the more polarized I think a guy is after checking back the turn, the more I will check to him on the river and pray that he reopens with a bluff. In the last hand, I thought the guy could have potentially had much more of a merged flop raising range, and I wanted to make sure that I got an extra street of value out of that on the river. Yeah. This I think is pretty unstandard. See a guy raising with a hand like that on a king high board. Obviously, if we knew he had that, we should be betting. Especially when we had that removal. I think we should be sizing up more here. The fact that we're 100 deep makes me think that we're not using good bet sizing here, because now we're left with almost a double overbet on the river, and we should be able to get more value than that. That's a tough spot. I can't find a fold, considering I think we could split with a decent amount of ace queen, and I don't make him for enough ace king for not 4-betting pre. He could also potentially be making a mistake at this limit with something like jack 10, ace 9. I don't know if we could find this fold. I think it'd be a little bit too assumptive. That's just awful. Good job. Whoops. So same thing here with this bet sizing. I'm not really a fan. I think it should be like somewhere between 55 and 65% pot. It's not bad though. I mean, we're still leaving ourselves with only like an 80% pot bet on the river, so I don't think it's a big issue. This hand looks fine. C-bet flop, get called. Like here, I think the sizing is much more acceptable because of stacks. And I would jam river with only this much behind. I just don't put him on a ton of 6x, and I think you get called by enough dominated stuff here. Also keep in mind that like these are the type of spots where if you were to talk about it in theory, you do not need 50% equity when you're called on the river when you're out of position. Because when you check, he has the ability to polarize and take equity realization away from you. Um, a lot of guys don't get that concept, and it's not something that you can just learn from hearing it once. You have to really sit with it and understand that when someone polarizes on the river, they are using a bluffing range that is aiding their value range in terms of allowing them to generate EV production by creating indifference. So you don't want someone to be balancing the right amount of bluffs, because if they balance up to the indifference point, the indifference frequency, the optimal bluffing frequency, that's taking maximum EV away from you, because it's putting you in a position where you either have to fold to that amount of bluffs that he's using, in that case no longer getting the equity realization from them, or you have to pay it, and then he makes the same amount of production off of his value portion of that range. So you get these guys who are like, well, I just thought I would check here and pick off bluffs and that would be better. It's a pretty narrow way of understanding what's actually going on, because just because you allow him to bluff doesn't necessarily mean that that is superior to betting once the bet size becomes small enough. So it's a function of how much equity do you have when called and how large is the bet sizing that you're using. More accurately, how small is the bet sizing you're using, because the smaller the bet sizing, the more you can afford to have less than 50% equity, because your risk to reward goes down the less money that you're putting out on the bet. So I think it's an important concept that most guys get jumbled up, and the reason it's important is because it lends itself to serious distortions in terms of how the game functions, where you hear guys just like, I think what this actually does, it leads into the paranoia of searching for combinations of bluffs that you could beat in someone's range and then justifying a call based on that, when most of the time, if you watch like everything that I advocate through these streams, people are not bluffing up to the required optimal bluffing frequency, so it's still a fold. Question. But when we bet, he can reopen with a range with bluffs that makes us indifferent? Do you mean when we bet and he raises? Well, I mean, he can't raise here because we're all in. Basically, the simplified version of it is when we bet for whatever sizing we use here, the reason we don't have to have 50% equity when called is because when we check, we don't realize all of our equity versus dominated hands in his range. The reason being is that when he puts some bluffs into a balanced betting range, that is not the same as us being able to bluff catch profitably. That's the shift you have to make. We are not bluff catching profitably when he's balancing bluffs with an appropriate value betting range. What's actually happening is that we're losing equity realization on the pot because he's utilizing a street that he can polarize on. These are like core foundational pillars that you have to have if you're going to understand the functionality of the game. So in a sense, like I'm still very, very theory oriented in terms of making sure that my context is wound very tight around the shit that matters. But what I'm not interested in is going off in these like flailing directions of over analytics in lines that we either don't have the environmental data for to be running the PO sims on, or where the theory oriented strategy is so complex that it doesn't apply or translate back into practical context. So I think it's an important distinguishment that being very theory oriented in the right way to me means staying relevant with the theory that actually translates into practicality. Core foundational stuff like this I think is really important for understanding the game on a simple, swift level. And then where it got spun out was guys lost track of how to direct themselves relevantly with theory, and they got a little bit too involved with things that were outside of their ability to integrate. Johnny's right. If he over bluffs here, then it suddenly makes it a better decision to start by checking, and everything functions on a gradient. We could also make the argument that if he doesn't bluff enough, we could also argue for checking rather than taking a value on, because now we have a very clear fold in a spot where he's not slashing our equity realization nearly as much. Cool hand. A lot of guys think I still don't have the theory up my sleeve just because I went X-Blow on you. I think this hand's fine. I had a flashback just now of how much that concept tormented me in my early 20s. I learned it with Matthew Janda, and as brilliant as he was, what I don't think he was necessarily that good at was fitting it in a context that made sense to me. He would explain it very mathematically. I would sit there with the formula for hours, like banging my head against the computer, wondering how this thing worked. Um, I think that's the reason why I'm so inspired to be someone who simplifies complexity, is because I remember how fucking annoying it was for people who were naturally more gifted than me at math, to be able to understand that stuff through the math when I couldn't understand it conceptually. So that's been sort of my overall drive, the whole time, I think, is that I always swore to myself like that if I ever got the wisdom, that my next goal would be to simplify it and create the bridge for people who were less theoretically gifted, less mathematically gifted, or just people who are more conceptual learners and intuitive learners, um, and then to still be able to provide sort of the concept math behind it that backs it up. It was always important to me. I know like most of the stuff that I get from guys who are struggling analysts is like, I need this to be proven, but I also want it to be simplified, and I feel very connected to that paradigm. Looks good. Yeah, I don't know if I would see bet the aces, but I think once you do, bet, bet, bet is a really good line. Um, there's arguments for checking, obviously, which is that you have massive removal, and I'm sure solver would check it at some frequency. I think one of the main ways that you can get around the mixed strategy argument there is to try to think what percentage of his flatting range preflop is ace-x heavy. The more ace-x makes up of his distribution preflop, even after removal effects of you having aces and the ace coming on postflop, the more you should probably be playing a lead, lead, lead strategy. Does your blind versus blind 3-bet range look similar to your big blind versus button, or does it differ a lot? Good question. Haven't thought about that actually. Well, okay, if I'm playing well balanced and not exploitative, I think they're both around like between 15 and 18%. Composition, I think my big blind 3-bet is more polarized. I have more hands like king 3 off, and my big blind versus small blind, I will use more like super junk hands. And I think that's just a natural adjustment for ranges being wider. So when you're polarized, I feel like the worst hands in your bluffing range are going to be weaker, when you're defending something like 75-80% versus small blind. Nick, do you think the really good high stakes regs just have natural intuition that makes them good? I'm not sure. I think there's definitely an aspect of being gifted intuitively. I also think that there are guys who theory comes very naturally to. And so they have more of like a theoretically oriented mind that balances their assessments pretty well if they do choose to play balanced. But usually the guys who are very theoretically smart are also able to be good exploitatively because they're understanding the equilibriums really well. So I don't really have any of those guys in my network, so I can't really speak on like what they experience. But I mean, I know they're doing something, and I know if you look at other industries, like look at somebody like Magnus Carlsen, best chess player, You watch his documentary, and he will literally tell you that like playing chess to him is like composing a musical piece. Like it's that intuitive for him. And I think a lot of his studying is based on pattern recognition and in his own way. Um, just intuitive guidance, pattern recognition, and then kind of just letting go in game and letting that sort of run you. Subconscious integration of things that you can't even really quantify how you understood in the first place. I think that's like the mark of a true natural or maybe even genius. Oh, good question coming. I'll do this hand first. So this is a spot I would just jam river, I think. Oh, I guess we're deeper. I'm really unconcerned about the flush because of the fact that we have the king blocker and that the ace is a flush and jack is on board. So I think I would just make a bet here like 16, and then if he raises, I think you can still fold. I think we can trust ourselves to fold. That being said, we do have to call here. Question in the chat: what would you do if you lost your whole poker knowledge, but you have to climb the limits very fast? You can write a few sentences on a piece of paper that your memory lost new image can read. What would you write in the paper? Oh, like if me right now could write something down. Fuck, man, great question. That might be the best question of the stream yet. I wish I had a prize picked out. Holy shit. It's such an important question too, because what it really is getting at is what is the one thing? And I've been asking guys this lately, especially in my new video that came out. One of the things I said is, what is the one thing that if you had answered would make everything easier? And why the fuck aren't you asking that question daily as many times to as many people as possible that you trust? I think there's a lot of ways I could go with that answer too. It wouldn't be by PO Solver. It would not be that. Oh, I know what it would be. It would be vague as fuck. But if I trusted this, it would work for me. So if future Nick wrote this down on a piece of paper, and I knew that my old self would be capable of trusting it because he knew that it came from the future. So if old Nick really trusted that future Nick had written this message for him, and that it came from the hand of God, that message would read, trust yourself beyond all reason. The reason that it would read that is because I truly believe that the intuitive guidance system of the learning process is much, much, much more important than any sort of analytical or tactical tip that I could give myself or anyone. The only reason that I've been able to do what I did in the last year, climbing through the ranks of like relevantly bridging the learning process into this new field of mass database exploitative play, is because I leveraged enough pain from not trusting myself to just come to the conclusion that I was going to dive head on into a more trusting mode than I had ever learned from. And I just kept scaling that process without any sort of real metric or quantitative feedback at the start. But you sort of gain conviction as you go with it, because if something is truly coming from a balanced inspiration, then the next thing that you have is also the ability to calibrate and adjust in that process. Basically, there is no emotional ties to anything that you're trying out when you're coming from a completely trusting place. All you're doing is trusting the intuitive inspiration of moving in this direction, and then as soon as that inspiration or as soon as that feedback from the environment shifts your motive, you redirect. So it's this constant game of just pivoting and then moving forward until 3 months go by and you look back and you're like, oh shit, I went from here to here and I don't even really know how it happened because it didn't seem linear because I wasn't trying to plan the steps. I made a video on YouTube. Brian, will you find that if you're there and paste the link? It was a sort of a look into the creativity aspect behind scaling Poker Detox. I think that has a ton to do with it. Um, so yeah, from the hand of God, if you could believe it, the most valuable advice you could get would be to trust yourself beyond reason, because realize how it takes all of the guesswork out. If God, whoever he is, came down and you literally believed it, that this was real, and he said, "Son, trust yourself," you would go, like, this is why fucking jihad guys fly planes into buildings. You would go out and do whatever the fuck you felt was most inspired to do with complete conviction that it came straight from God, that you had the validation to do this. And in a way, I think that's a foolproof system. It's a dangerous system, but if it's guided by pure inspiration, it's the total key to empowerment and success, because you sort of create your own reality from there. You just become a really good adjuster, and all you see is opportunity. You no longer see failure or anything. You just see every single next obstacle as the thing that's there to get you to pivot in the next beneficial direction. I think this is a fine barrel, and I would give up river too. I don't generally see hotspots in this line, and I certainly don't think this is one of them on this texture. All right, he can't post links. Well, can I post links? What's it called? Macro creativity. Yeah. Sparky. Could you elaborate on the ace-king hand Hero played a few minutes ago where the flush came on the river and the villain donk bluffed all in? I don't think it was a donk bluff. It was a check call. And the reason I thought it was a call is because we could be splitting with value and potentially even dominating ace-jack if he was value betting that. I think the ace-jack is less likely, especially for the overbet. But with the removal on the hearts too, I think it's relevant. I don't really make him for a lot of non-Broadway flush draws. Like, he shouldn't have the hand in his range that he shows up with here in the first place, so it's assumptive to put him on that. I do agree this line gets massively underbluffed. I just think that the removal aspect of having the king of hearts, also with the ranging aspect of him not having enough non-Broadway flushes to begin with, also with the possibility of him value betting ace king pretty liberally and potentially value betting weaker two pair, which we've seen at this limit already. At some non-zero frequency, I think we have to account for the fact that we can dominate a weaker two pair here. So I think all that kind of makes it a little bit too hard to find the fold, especially when now the amount of hands that beat us is such a low combination. So he's so polarized relative to our hand that it takes very little dominated hands in his range before we have a call. Maybe like a couple combos is all we have to find. And the ace-king split equity might get us even close to that. Okay, cool. So I'm on the wrong hand, apparently. Everything holds true for that analysis. So which one is it? Did I misread the line? It wasn't. It was this one then. Okay, so it's bet. Bet. I don't think this line gets underbluffed at all. I think this is the natural fish line. So I think it's just a context difference here. And there might be some differences in 3-bet pots, but for the most part, I just don't think this line should exist. Therefore, it's already grouped into a fish category. Then you have to do the mass data analysis on whether or not the fish are doing this strictly with value or doing it more with bluffs. And I think that what you'll find if you look at this line over very large samples is that it's actually one that fish use very often, with turning weak pair into bluff, turning misdraw into bluff. Like, I would not be surprised to see 9-10 here like often. One thing I want to mention, there will be a part on the night vision pack. Brian, remind me to make a note on this because I really want this in there. where we'll use Hold Manager functionality to show pie charts because we have total clairvoyance over the Bovada showdown environment. Um, Not even showdowns, we have clairvoyance over every single hand in every line that they've played. So, especially on the river here, we'll be able to show a pie chart of how often they have different tiers of their range when they show up in this spot. And it'll help you guys sort of solidify the different hotspots in terms of, okay, well, now we not only have percentage reads, but we actually have the range breakdown of what they're playing in this spot. I agree a lot with George too that it does depend what type of fish it is. Um, like maybe this wouldn't be a call versus the guy who's playing 65-4 VPI PFR, but it's also a textural thing too. Like I don't really see how there's a ton of value. Like yeah, he'll have backed up flushes that came in, but other than that, I think there's a lot of stuff that he could just be misplaying when it's already a line that shouldn't really exist in the first place at any sort of real frequency. Um, so I do see stuff here often where like guys will try to play at a card that they can't really rep, and it turns out to be a bluff more than not. What did he have? Oh, he had a bluff. Okay, well, maybe you've been running bad, bro. Oh, cool. So it looks like we're going to be able to use hand to note for that. I had a moment, I told the guys, because I was watching the first tutorials that came in for the hand to note pack. Basically, the one guy in the team will make the tutorial, and then Brian and I will watch it, give feedback, and we'll do a final copy. So the first two tutorials came in, and I was on my couch last night, just like alone, watching them, and I literally, for the first time in a long time, I was literally dying laughing because it's so good. Like it's so ridiculously thorough, and like all the data is there that I just had this moment. I was like, wow, this is so fucking stupid how far we've come in 6 months. I don't know. Maybe I was just being a little bit what's it called? Nostalgic. But like it was sort of that full circle moment for me, similar to what I was saying about just trusting yourself beyond all reason. Like if you would have told me that this was what we were scaling to when I started this little operation back a year ago, like not even, when I decided to go off in the exploited direction and start looking at Bovada hole cards face up and devising exploitative strategies like that, if you would have told me it scaled into Poker Detox Night Vision pack, which I honestly think is going to be literally the most advanced product that the industry's ever seen, I would be like, go fuck yourself. Okay, we saw that hand. It's so good that I think it's going to be the last pack that I have to put out, and that makes me really happy. Because initially I thought I have like 6 packs in me, but this one is like totally the total self-sufficient pack that once you pick it up, you need nothing else for like the rest of your career, except maybe like mental game training. I think that's a river value bet, or at least it's very close to one. And the reason I don't necessarily like checking is because I think it's going to get underbluffed and not value bet thin enough, so I think that breaks the mix strategy. We're still not sure how much the pack's going to cost. I'm working on incentives. I'm thinking about doing a private Skype group for only Poker Detox Night Vision guys. It might be even a private Facebook group, something where you guys can connect and trim the hours off of working on mass database with guys that are in your similar environment. Because there is like I don't know how much the preliminary work is. It's something like 5 hours, depending on what program you use for it, to compile all the data, put it into either charts if you're using Hold Manager, or hand to notes a little bit easier. But I want to create a night vision community because, I mean, I think it's well deserved for guys that are committing to that type of thing, because it's a big deal. Like you will be at the leading edge of everything good in poker if you have that type of pack knowledge, and I feel like those guys should be connected. And it should be exclusive, because fuck everyone that doesn't want to make that commitment. So to answer your question, um, the price overall will be a reflection of how long the pack ends up being in terms of hourly length, and then how valuable I think the incentives that we're offering are. I know that there's going to be some sort of exclusive group that's going to be one of the main incentives. How long should it really take before you look at yourself and say you've made a ton of progress? I had help with this because I had a girlfriend at the time who was watching me carefully, and she would be my mirror, and she's like, dude, what the fuck is going on with you? Like, you're changing a lot. And I sensed it in myself just from how I felt that I was sort of like building my, I guess you would say, like my frequency was going up. Like I was more inspired to to go to work every day and to like hustle. And I felt like I was also coming into like my core values as a man at the same time. So she was, I think, sensing that. But 3 months, I knew something was really fucking up. And that's why like I got a taste of it and I was like, oh shit, like I'm sticking with this for sure. And then 3 months after that, I put out the PO Unlocked pack after working with a bunch of guys and being able to synthesize a lot of stuff and having great results on Bovada. So 6 months was like the breakout period for me, and then the last 6 months have been, I think, just an exercise in like learning how to balance that momentum with still giving myself time for integration periods. I've noticed something about myself as a learner and as sort of an explorer that I'm not the type of person that likes to run with something for very long before I switch it. So like you hear guys talk about like, well, it's all about how hard you hustle. If you watch like Gary Vaynerchuk, that's something he's huge on, is like it's the one variable that you have total control over. And he's someone that works his ass off. But what I find is that if I work too hard from one mode, like if I stay in the same paradigm for too long, I exhaust that relatively quickly if I go hard with it. And then I feel this tension where I know it's time to make a big shift in how I'm looking at something. And I kind of relate that to developing good problem solving skills. Like, okay, I've taken this chapter of my life to the limit. I've extracted all of the value out of it that it has to offer. And now I feel like if I don't take this shift, then I'm going to be missing out on a potential um, next level step. So what it's been like for me is trying to identify when it's time to ease off the pedal and actually make like the warp drive shift to the next level. And I think each pack that I've put out has kind of been that moment for me where it's like, okay, first it was PO. Okay, now it's mental game with some data points, and now with night vision, it's like, oh, it's the mass data and everything included, and teaching people how to versatilely apply it. Um, and who knows from there. I've got some cool ideas for 2017 planned. I think it's basically going to be me going into private coaching. Um, for the most part, I'm going to keep trying to make like innovative themes for the Twitch streams and try to make it more interactive with you guys than it even is right now. Um, and then I think I might scale into more of a creative momentum building type of format of teaching, which is like getting to the heart of what keeps you from becoming an independent learner, what keeps you from being able to generate that initial momentum. Because for me, I feel like that's the most important part of the overall training process is how to get the guy into action. If you think about like the starting friction for me in that first 3 months, it was leveraged by a lot of emotional suffering. And I don't know if a lot of guys have suffered as much as me and think that's the reason that most guys haven't made that transition yet. Um, or they just don't have the perspective shifts that allow them to see that it's okay to validate trying something new. I think that might be the other half of it. So for me as a teacher, that's something that I want to build a bridge for is I would love if people didn't have to suffer as much as I did to get the realizations or the redirect that I got that helped me so much at the end of 2015, heading into 2016. That hand's fine. That's a good call, actually. I'm not so sure that it's good in practice, though, because I think this flop gets horrendously overfolded. and I don't know how often it gets merge bet with middling pairs. That being said, for the price, you have a good argument. I don't really associate that price with like with being value heavy, any more so than I would $6. So this is like one spot where I'll be like, oh, the price is good because I don't think you're getting like baited with pot odds as often as you would be on the river if somebody bet 2/5. I think this could be easily like a cheap stab sizing. That being said, he's also going to have a lot of ace-x. And at this point, it's just a fold because there's that small bet sizing baiting you with a merged range. I think that's the worst hand we've seen yet in terms of not making the connection that you're just getting leveled with a pot odds trick. I don't know why I'm marking this for you. It's in my fucking database. But yeah, you'll see this stuff kind of come up, and I'm guessing like everybody who's been watching the streams has seen this come up in one way or another in every lesson, and it's just more than anything from talking to more guys, it's a misconception of when to move away from a theoretically oriented mode of thinking and when to move into just a binary pot odd psychology understanding. Like when I say that pot odds are binary from psychology, what I mean is that there is no logic in trying to say that, well, he needs less bluffs here for me to call when his logic is binary in the sense that he doesn't use that sizing nearly enough with bluffs. Like he might literally never use that sizing with bluffs. That's how psychology works. If it's not in somebody's mindset to be using small river sizings creatively with bluffs, they will literally never do it. Never. Like that's the thing that I don't think guys get about the way that the mind works, is that you will not have like random deviations in someone's mental pattern when they see something to not be beneficial. And most guys would not look at small bet sizing on the river and be like, oh, that's a beneficial sizing for a bluff. So now every single time that they get into that spot, that's never a consideration for them. Or if it's considered, it's dismissed before it's even viewed as like a valid option. But this is like, and so many people struggle with this. Like, Brian, you remember how long you had this leak? But it's such a simple shift once you actually see that the way to solve it is to look at it from a psychological perspective or get the mass data on it. Like I'm sure we could run filters and see how often was a 2/5 or less sized river bet a bluff, and then we would have like hard black and white to show us that we're wrong to bluff catch in this spot. I think the small bets are very creative as bluffs for that reason, but they're not good versus the overall player pool because look, everyone still decides to call here. Like the reason this bet is still out there as a sizing that people use exploitatively is because the pool hasn't demonstrated that they understand that they should be folding exploitatively to it. So much of this in terms of what the best strategies are versus the environments is predicated on people not being disciplined or doing their homework enough to adjust to what's actually been going on for the last 2, 5, 10 years. This was something that people were doing 10 years ago versus fish. And now it's something that theory-oriented defenders fall into as a trap because what they're seeing is pot odds. So when I mention paradigms a lot, this is what I mean, that like if someone is stuck thinking about something from a certain line of sight, they will not be able to look at it from an outside perspective or a more inclusive perspective where there are certain data points that could overturn that this would be a profitable bluff catching opportunity. I will fold here. Data points would be that I do think he improves somewhat on the ace from his flop floats. I don't like the fact that the 8 paired the turn because that's going to improve his trip distribution more so than other cards. I don't like the half pot river bet sizing because to me it seems like he's milking value. I think for bluffs you would see a larger sizing than that on average. And if you want to throw in some blockers, I don't like how you block the king of diamonds. And lastly, I don't think we ever split. Like I don't think we ever dominate any part of his value range. Good job folding. I would definitely call an ace because at that point I feel like I dominate a substantial portion of his value range. or at least split with it. I think we could have an ace on the river if we check called with ace king, ace queen maybe, or if we had like an ace low that had a pair. This would be a river fold because it's one of those code red runouts. This would be a river fold too for similar reasons as the last one. What'd you ask, George? Can you give practical examples where trusting yourself will make you climb the stakes at a faster rate? Sure. Well, I'll speak from my own experience. The first thing I trusted myself on in this whole process was that on account of seeing the hole cards in the Bovada environment, I trusted that I could make adjustments to my game faster than what was currently recommended in terms of community speak. Like a lot of the resistance that I got from the guys I was working with at the time was, Nick, we can't make adjustments this quickly because it's results oriented. But I said the results orientation of it is predicated on not seeing whole cards. So like someone who says you need 100,000 hands before you even look to make adjustments in your strategy based on win rate, I think that gets trimmed a shitload when you have clairvoyance over the showdowns. So I didn't know how much it trimmed it, but I wanted to go all in on the trust that I could basically make adjustments, see if they were consistent as I built larger samples and kept seeing the whole cards, and then pivot and recalibrate from there. So at first it was a little reckless because I was working with like a 10,000 hand sample where all that I saw were that people were bluffing me much more often in spots that I didn't think they were capable of bluffing in previously, because it was the first time I had access to whole cards. So I devised a strategy around the certain lines that I thought were being bluffed at a high frequency and started to categorize players based on their HUD profiles that were doing stuff in that type of spot. And I sort of used that as my intro to trusting myself to to readjust my strategy. In a way, I got lucky because I was right from the jump in the assumptions and most of the assumptions I made. So you could say there was a luck aspect of it that it stuck from the first guess. But there was a lot of stuff that didn't stick. Like a lot of the things that I did from maybe December through April in terms of working with a bunch of students, seeing what their leaks were, seeing how they responded to training, and then synthesizing that into the PU Unlocked pack. That was a very experimental stage for me where I had students that weren't connecting with some of my ways of training, and then that's why I gained the conviction to make the PO Unlocked pack, because I really felt like I had worked on a practical, versatile bridge that was going to be helpful for a lot of guys regardless of what paradigm they were in. So as it's sort of like on two layers. I'm trusting myself as a player and as a coach for trying to develop the bridge for the content that has to sort of sync up with a variety of different minds. As a player, what I was trusting myself with moving into 1020 Bovada was that using the skills I had honed of, going through every single hand in my database, whole cards face up, and learning the environment almost intuitively in that way. Like this was before I had a ton of mass database analysis. I was basically prioritizing lines and psychological patterns, bet size tells, texture variations. One of the main things moving up to 1020 was like overbet strategies were getting reversed. I was now calling overbets wide because I knew that the guys that were using them were the aggressive regulars who had stomped the lower limits to get there. So there was a lot of this. I would say a lot of my trust was leveraged away from the table, thinking about the game in a way where I was like, okay, I really feel like since there's so much information available that wasn't currently on the table for me, that I can piece this together in a way that feels streamlined. And even if I'm wrong about an assumption in a certain direction, I'm going to be able to be humble enough to take the feedback from the environment that I won't spin myself out too long. So here's a really good point. In trusting yourself, the most important thing to see is that the humility is what saves you. True trust is actually not having a preference over what direction you go in, but just sensing into it based on what feels holistically incentivized. That's a delicate issue because what's actually holistically incentivized is a combination of what feels inspired from your current knowledge and what the environmental feedback is showing you. So you're sort of merging those two. It's like, what did I think was correct up until this point? And is the feedback I'm getting severe enough to now redirect me? The problem where most guys get stuck is that they have a resistance to letting go of this, the initial assumption. And I think that's why the community stagnates for so long, because if you think about it, there's a lot invested in what your old paradigm says is the right way to go about shit. No one wants to hear that all of the work they did with PioSolver and all of the grueling hours is for naught. But it's necessary if you're going to take the redirect from your environment to have no emotional ties whatsoever to the next most incentivized direction. And I feel like that's something that's at the heart of self-trust in the learning process, is being able to take that redirect on the fly without asking any questions or needing any sort of verification for why it might be right. The whole process of a trusting learning curve is experimental. But the only reason that it's incentivized to begin with is because you've clarified that the paradigm that you're in is already futile. And that's the point I was at. I was like, well, this shit doesn't work because I'm miserable and I've been working really hard at theory and PioSolver for years now. So I either stay miserable or I try something new. I honestly feel like that's kind of the point that you have to get to if you're like going to revolutionize something, because I really feel like I'm sort of the first one who's gone out and said this is the fucking way to go. At least the first very theory-oriented person who's broken out of the shell and spoke openly about it. Um, at least in this industry. I think that that's my favorite topic to talk about. Like I almost get excited when I see trust questions because it's so vague but so visceral at the same time. It's the one thing that you have to experience to start to understand the value of it. Um, and I highly recommend it for anyone. I don't know any other site other than Bovada where you can see hole cards. A couple more hands. This might actually... No, I don't think we can full turn. The fact that we have a cold caller on the big blind readless, I would already be chalking that up to like sort of a fishy profile, just because I think they make up more of the guys who are cold calling three bets. A lot of times this will come from suited connector type hands, pocket pairs, could be even wider depending what profile he is. So after getting flatted versus this profile with only a pot size bet left behind, it's really hard for me to be able to justify that we can be finding a fold here when I can think of like three different ways he can construct his range, both pre-flop and if he stabs here, that would justify calling. I do feel like we should just stick it in here though, because there's a chance that he's merge betting with something dominated, and there's a chance that he's just like betting some sort of, equity pushing draw. And I would hate, like, since we're not check folding river, I think I would just maximize right now to get both protection and prevent him from checking back something that was dominated value. Like, because I don't have enough confidence to check fold the river for the pot odds I'll be getting if I only check call right here, I think it makes a lot more sense to maximize versus the parts of his range that I will dominate and that won't fold, and get some protection versus draws too, which I guess fall into sort of that category. So if he checks back like that hand, that's what I'm worried about. So I would mark this as a technical week because what's being misunderstood is the best way to get the money into the pot. That's the most simplified way to put it, is that if you think about what happens if you check call turn, since you can't check fold river, the only thing that you lose out on is hands that you were dominating, that would have called the turn min raise, but will check back had had you played the line that you did. Who's trolling? I don't even see anyone. What did you ask, Canaxis? We 3-bet small blind versus middle position. Board 10-8, 2, two-tone. Do we 1/3 range here? You can. I think you can do that at a very high rate since you're pushing good equity. It's what I would do. When you're small blind, your range is very linear to begin with versus MP. So most of the optimal solutions use very high c-bet strategies in that spot, even if you weren't using a 1/3 sizing. Philippe, Paris. Ripping turn isn't best. I would check raise turn here. Spewy said, do you have data on raises versus 1/3 c-bets? Yeah, they're not high enough, especially in the line I was just talking about where you're the 3-better. Well, I'm thinking more like 3-better in position. That's a cool one because guys are not nearly check raising as aggressively as they should be when they cold call you when you're like the button 3-better and then you bet 1/3 on the flop, which makes your 1/3 c-bets like way more efficient. In terms of are they check raising enough versus your 1/3 in single raise pot when you have position? No, definitely not. They're not calling enough overall. They're not defending enough overall. They're folding too much and they're not check raising enough. And that's one of the reasons that I think the simplified, well-balanced strategy is also sort of the magical exploitative strategy, because the hack seems to be that when you require more of the defender, those are the spots where he makes more mistakes. If you think about it, like what you're really looking for, I'm going to end on this note because this is kind of cool. What you're looking for as someone who devises intelligent strategies is differentiations between how PO Solver thinks about the game and how a human thinks about the game. So there are certain stigmas or like patterns that we follow that are unchallenged just in terms of what we've seen in forums or what we intuitively associate with a hand worth calling in this spot. What is really cool is when you lay a lot of PO suggested ranges versus human ranges across different textures, what you find is that there are a decent amount of spots where the human's interpretation of what's playable is nowhere close to what PO is doing. Usually you'll find PO defends much more aggressively. So you could almost say that to summarize what goes on in poker and why the environments are imbalanced, it's because the distance between the way the human understands the defense frequencies and what is actually correct at equilibrium is still pretty far apart. If the market got more balanced in that sense and brought the two together, we would no longer be able to have a poker competitive industry because there wouldn't be enough edge. So that's sort of like where I'm headed with, I think, scaling the understanding of why the highly exploitative strategies are just the most incentivized, is that we're dealing with an imbalanced market. It doesn't make sense to play a well-balanced strategy when we have vision now over where the imbalances of the market are. GTO was appealing to the people who GTO was appealing at a time period where we didn't have vision and where people were in a defensive paradigm on account of it. Now we're working with tools like mass data analysis, hand to note type shit, where we have massive vision, and now the paradigm shifts because now we have to validate the fact that there's something more useful out there. One more question, George. Why is check 24/7 out of position incentivized? He's talking about pre-flop raise. I wouldn't deviate. You can. I've given a rant on this back in the October streams where a lot of people were like saying how silly it is to check small blind versus big blind because you have a instantly profitable bluffing opportunity as small blind, which is just totally not true. We're dealing with equilibriums. There is no exploitative model that the solver will pump out. They were basically working on a 1-A MDA assessment of what the defense frequency should be in terms of 1-A compared to what the solver big blind was folding. and they came to the conclusion that since on an ace-high board, small blind is at such a big range advantage, you can instantly profit exploitatively with a bluff. But no, you can't. That's a mixed strategy hand. That bluff is still a mixed strategy. It will have future opportunity to bluff all the same. The reason I think it's incentivized to check range in most spots, especially as like cutoff versus button or UTG versus cutoff, is that it's a simplified strategy that's already quite close to what's recommended by solver. Because ranges are out of symmetry in that formation, you'll rarely find a spot where solver c-bets more than like 25%. So as a strategy simplification, I think it's better to go to one strategic option, check all, retain vision over your range, and as a bonus, you get to funnel the button or the in-position player into a line where he usually stabs at a frequency that he creates imbalances versus when he faces a check raise, which is one of the major parts of the night vision pack actually, is how to contextualize that hotspot in a way where you can pattern recognize the boards that you should be going after really aggressively in terms of check raising versus their stabs. And done. Thank you guys for coming out. Really great questions today. It's Friday, so I think on Monday we're going to do another hand history. Let me check the old thing. Hey Philippe, you're up on Monday. I didn't know it was that soon, but I have it as the 12th. Is that right? Yeah, Monday the 12th. We've got Padis from the stream, a student of mine since the PO course. So we'll check that out. In the meantime, hit my blog up if you want, because I'm releasing one clip from like old streams that I've hand selected and cut every day for the rest of the year. Thank you guys. See you Monday. Good luck. Peace out.